afternoon, good evening, good whatever time you're watching this. Welcome to Pace the Podcast, where we give you one step of wisdom for the long journey ahead. I am your host, Jordan, and I'm super excited to be back on Pace, the podcast. But before we even get any further, if you haven't watched the video that I released a couple days ago, go watch it. I apologize for the lack of content and lack of communication, but also I kind of announced a couple changes that we're having in the format and everything, so go check that out. But if you have already seen that, then welcome to episode 3. Today we're going to talk about perspective. And before I even get really into the wisdom, I want to just share a story. A couple years ago in 2019, me and a couple students at Highlands College went to Peru for a mission trip. And before I even go any further, I just want to take a second and encourage or even just plead people to go on a mission trip. I mean, I highly encourage it. At least take two, one nationally and one internationally. I think it benefits you more than you realize. It opens your eyes. You get to see what the Lord is doing, not just where you're from, but also within the country and also out of the country, different cultures and different people. So I highly encourage that. And I also have in the description a couple missions organizations that you can look up and see if you can join a missions group or even support. And also on the Instagram, I'm going to post about my friend. She's going on a mission trip to Africa that you can help support her. If you don't feel like you want to go on a mission trip, at least try to support someone who is going on a mission trip. And so I say this because a couple of years ago, I went to Peru for a mission trip with my classmates, and it was eye-opening for sure. It was a different experience. It's definitely a culture shock. But I want to share this story because on the way back home, we had an overnight flight. And so everybody gets on the plane. I get super excited because I have a window seat. I'm like, all right, I'm going to sleep. And then I'm going to see the sunrise from the plane. And so just like everybody else fell asleep, I wake up right before sunrise. I look at the little screen that the chairs had. And it said sunrise at this time. It's about the right time, and I super excited. I just woke up and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna look out the window, open the blind of the window. I'm like, I look out and I see nothing but pitch darkness, and it's crazy because I'm like, I just woke up. I'm like shaking my eyes, like what's going on? Like, am I dreaming or what's going on? Look back at the screen that the chair has. I'm like, okay, no, it says sunrise is this time. I look down. I'm like, okay, I see city lights because we're like up over above Miami, and I look to the right of me and I see all my classmates and my friends on the other side, and they're just like all huddled out the window, like taking photos and stuff. And I realized I was on the wrong side of the plane because if you guys didn't know, sunrise is on the east, but it sets on the west, and so I was on the wrong side of the plane. But it was in that moment I think God spoke to me and He said something. He was like, because of your perspective, you missed out on a promise. And I just sat down like, I missed out on a promise. And he kind of reiterates, he's like, your perspective will determine if you get to see the fullness of my goodness and promises for you. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. And he goes, he said, it's not because you didn't know. You knew, but your perspective was off. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today, but perspective, because it's our perspective that will determine whether we get to experience the fullness of the goodness of God and the promises that He has for us. And so I looked up perspective and like what is defined as. There's a couple different definitions, but one is a mental view. Another one is capacity to view things in their true relation. And another definition is point of view. And I like to define perspective as the lens that you see the world through. The way you see your experiences, the way you see the trials and tribulations that come in your life, that's how you see it. It's kind of like glasses. This is how you see it, world through. And so when God told me that, I'm like, okay, God, I see where you're going. He goes, He wants us to have a faith perspective. And the verse that kind of came up when He was talking to me was 2 Corinthians 5:7. I think we all kind of know this verse, but it's kind of, I'm going to put it into a different light. It says, we walk by faith, not by sight. And so if you guys didn't know, The context is really important when reading scripture, and especially this one, because Corinthians is a letter. And so when you read a letter, you read it kind of all the way through, and the context around it really, really does matter. And so I kind of went around the context and looked, okay, he is talking about perspective. If you look at the surrounding verses, it's all about an eternal perspective. It's all about heavenly things. And so this verse is in the context of perspective. And I kind of looked at the word in the Greek, the original language that it was written in, and the word that they use for walk is actually closer related to the word to live. So he's saying, for we live by faith. And the word sight in the Greek is more related to understanding. So we live in a faith perspective and not by a perspective of our own understanding. And we know Proverbs 3:5 says, do not lean on your own understanding, but trust me in all your ways. And so God is calling us to live, to walk in a faith perspective. And faith, according to Hebrews 1:11 says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, and believe in the belief of things not seen. So faith is the confidence in God and his words, whether we can see them or not. And I think it's really important that we have a faith perspective, because it kind of affects the way that we see our situations, through our trials, through our tribulations, the hard days, and the days we feel like it's hopeless. It kind of really changes everything. And so, because we all want to experience the fullness of God. Like, even in that moment, I knew that the sun was going to rise at this time. I knew the promise. I knew what was going to happen, but I still missed that because of my perspective. And so sometimes we're missing out because we don't have the proper perspective to experience the fullness. And so that's what I wanted to say today, that let's have a perspective of faith, that we may be able to experience the fullness of God and the fullness of what he has for us. And I did write down a couple contradicting perspectives that we can have. And number one is sometimes we have a perspective of fear. We look at life and try to navigate it through our fears by trying to stay away from the unknown, stay away from hurt and embarrassment or uncomfortability, or even the fear of failing. So we try to make sure that whatever we're doing is successful, and so we kind of limit ourselves through our fears. And God doesn't want us to live through fear. And then number two is fear, the perspective of the past. We live life through our past experience. Like, okay, I did this worked, so I'm going to keep doing this. Or I did this, and this is what happened. I got hurt and I got embarrassed, so I'm not going to do that. And God isn't calling us to be in a pocket. He's calling us to constantly grow, constantly keep moving forward. And so the challenge I want for all of us is to live a faith perspective life. And we do that by just evaluating ourselves, like, hey, what kind of perspective do I have? Do I have one of my pain, my past, of fear, or do I have a faith perspective? And once we get to that point, okay, how can I grow the perspective that I have in my life now? And so growing in faith it's pretty simple according to Romans. Romans 10:17 says, so faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. And I think the cool thing about this is that God has spoken to us, and it's in his word, and it's in his word that we get to know him and his promises. And so as we dig deeper into the word, our faith grows because we get to know him better, to know who he actually is and who he has revealed himself to be to us. And so that's my encouragement for the day is, as we continue to seek God in his word, we'll slowly grow to know him and grow in faith. So you have a friend who wants to hear this or needs to hear this, share it with them. Life is a long journey, and God is asking us to have a perspective of faith in this journey. All right, so share this with a friend, leave a like, leave a comment. Thank you guys for listening. Until next time.